Kia ora and welcome to another episode of Untidy. My name is Matilda Green. I'm a mum of three, podcaster, obviously, and online content creator. And I am here with my delightful co-host, Hannah Davison.
Thank you so much, Maddie. Hannah Davison, mother of two, dog sitter to several at the moment, must say. It's hectic.
God, you're just juggling them at the moment, aren't
I
you?
honestly, it's like back-to-back dogs at the moment. Just like the side hustle is becoming something of a main hustle. It's crazy. What else do I do? I'm the author of the My Big Moments children's books and podcaster mainly. But we are very excited today because we've got an incredibly relatable topic to many of us. It's one that we actually want to put a bit of a positive light on this transition in our lives because it cops a really bad rap, and that is our dear sweet brains as they're going through perimenopause and menopause. And we're very excited to welcome back to the show neuroscientist and author Dr. Sarah McKay. So, Sarah is a Kiwi born, Sydney based neuroscientist, author, and science commentator who specializes in translating complex brain research into practical insights for everyday life. She has a doctorate from Oxford and is the founder of Think Brain online neuroscience academy training programs. She's also the author of the Women's Brain book, Baby Brain, and her latest release, Brain Health for Dummies. She's delivered a TEDx talk and appears on TV, radio, and podcasts internationally as a go-to voice on brain health and well-being. And when we last chatted to Sarah, that was on our junket to Australia,
Sydney.
Maddie, to Sydney. God, those are the days, weren't they? We chatted to Sarah about the truth about baby brain. And if you missed that one, we'll put the link in the show notes. But there's a lot of life transitions to cover off. And we want to discuss and hopefully change the narrative a bit about peri and menopausal brains because all of this fuckery has to be for a reason, surely. Sarah, first up, I wanted to touch on the stark reality that I learnt about from doing a bit of research into you and your work, just how long women's brains have been getting studied for, because that's all in quite recent history, isn't it?
Mm. Look, some of it is recent and some of it actually has a longer history than what we might think. Because I guess the current story is women's health 100% has been ignored. There's been this massive gap, and we only sort of started looking at it 10 years ago or 5 years ago, which is the case for lots of different aspects of women's health. And that's why I suppose the way we could wrap it up is saying that healthcare is less evidence-based for women than it is for men. Now, that doesn't mean when I go to my GP, I walk in, she's like going, I don't know what to do with you because you're a female.
Oh,
How
God,
do
you've got a
how do
vagina. Where are we,
how do I
where are
treat
we going to
you?
go?
It just might mean that, say, if I have a particular set of symptoms or there's some kind of treatment or intervention or outcomes, that is probably been described or tested in a male population, and then we're just making an assumption that a female population will behave in the same way. Particularly when it comes to aspects of women's brain health, there's been this massive kind of ignorance and oversight. But then weirdly, there are also some aspects of women's brain health which go back a really long way. I found some research when I was updating Women's Brain book earlier this year, looking at cognition, so doing different kinds of tests of like verbal memory or reasoning or, working memory or speed, looking at does the menstrual cycle, just no matter what day of the month it is, how well your brain is working. And they were looking at that back in the 60s. That was
Really?
when women first started entering the workforce, and they were really interested in things like typing speed, secretarial skills. Is it going to matter if she's on her period or not? So there's some
Can she still
things
type?
which were tested quite well, quite a long time ago. It turns out it doesn't matter which day of the month it is, your brain is working fine, particularly typing speed. But then there are these massive gaps otherwise. However, I am an eternal optimist. And the really cool thing that is happening right now is that there's loads of women in this space doing research, lots of women in neuroscience who've kind of worked their way up the ranks. And so they're asking the questions, getting the research funding and doing the studies. So there's this massive kind of interest and investment and movement towards filling the gaps. Mm-hmm. So we should shout out to the scientists who are like doing the work.
Oh, well, that's really cool. And it feels like we are sort of entrenched in this social script bemoaning the decline and
Bemoaning.
dysfunction of the
Yeah.
perimenopausal brain. It seems to be
God.
quite a strong narrative and quite
Yeah.
negative. So what
Mm.
are your thoughts on that social trope as we see it playing
Man,
out?
like this, like you, I just did a podcast yesterday. How old are you two? I'm
I'm
just like an old
34.
lady. So how old are you?
Maddie's 34, I'm 42.
Yeah, so I did this podcast yesterday with these two Aussie girls who are one was in her late 30s, one was in her early 40s. And I'm like, they've got like little kids. And I've said, I feel like you've gone from talking about baby brain within the space of 6 months to worrying about perimenopause brain. You're still almost postpartum. And like, once your daughters hit puberty, are you going to start talking to them about everything that's going to go wrong with their brains? It feels like as soon as girls hit puberty, as soon as we've got a brain and we add in some hormones and a reproductive transition, whether that be your menstrual cycle or pregnancy or then menopause, which is now edging younger, the only conversation is dysfunction and decline and, like you said, moaning. And I'm really worried that that's the only story that's being told right now because of the gap, because there was this massive gap in women's health research and we're just starting to kind of catch up. A lot of the focus is on clinical problems and helping and doing research to resolve them. But that means the only conversation is about dysfunction and things that will go wrong. And no one's ever talking about the upsides of this, having a female brain and the way it's plastic and adaptable and responsive and efficient and flexible. We only talk about what could potentially go wrong. And when we only talk about what goes wrong, that's what we kind of almost our attention goes towards. So I understand that there's a big conversation around perimenopause. And I just turned 50, right? Like my entire social media feed is menopause, Taylor Swift, the summer I turned pretty, and Spring Spaniels. And I'm actually Team Jeremiah for what it's worth. But it feels like the conversation is only about the downsides. And I really want to talk about the upsides as well as what can potentially go wrong. Or else we'll never think about the benefits. And it's a little bit like the mental health conversation. Universal mental health interventions seemed like a great idea, but it hasn't necessarily improved mental health at all. And I'm starting to feel like women's brain health is falling under this umbrella. If we only talk about disease, we're not going to think about upsides.
Yeah. And I wonder if that's similar to the childbirth thing as well, because for so long, I think women's bodies have been a bit of a secret. We've just kind of got on with whatever we are dealing with, whether that's periods or menopause or whatever. And it's almost the same as childbirth as well. We hear so much about things that can go wrong and how scary and hard it is and all of these different things that can happen. But then young women are like, oh my God, do I have to go through that? That sounds horrific. And it's almost a similar thing. Like, the more we talk about all of the experiences, and it doesn't have to be the negative ones that are shouted from the rooftop, it takes away the fear.
I feel like if we were speaking to our daughters, and I've got sons, teenage sons, but if I had daughters and I was, before they hit puberty, presenting puberty as this, when everything's going to go wrong, what you should watch out for and, the potential downsides, we wouldn't be giving anyone any kind of agency or upside. And I think if we look at the research, we're not seeing mass decline and degeneration in female brains either through pregnancy, and we talked about this in your other podcast, pregnancy and baby brain and that whole conversation. And we're just getting more information and more research validating the idea that there are strengths and upsides and brains adapt and respond. And there's an evolutionary kind of mandate for brains to become better and more efficient and flexible in motherhood. And similarly, menopause is a little bit different. I suppose the perimenopause and then menopause could stretch a really long time now. I suppose some of the messaging is around your perimenopause symptoms could start like 10 years before your final period. So you hit 40, maybe you have your final period at like 47 or 48, then you're looking at your late 30s. And so people are starting to worry from their late 30s. And I'm like, well, you've got a really long way to go. We've also got post-menopause. So are we going to start worrying about Alzheimer's disease when we're still in our 30s? Which just seems incredibly depressing. I don't want to be doing that. Of course, there are all the things that we should be doing to keep our brains healthy. But is that the inevitable outcome, that we're just going from baby brain to brain fog and that's the end of the story?
It's just one shit thing after another.
Yeah, luckily the research doesn't necessarily support that. And there's plenty of things that we can do. And also, I suppose, plenty of upsides to having a midlife brain.
Yeah. And so, I mean, obviously people do genuinely suffer as they are going through this transition.
Yeah.
But I see your point as to, like, you know, when you're being kind of hyper aware of, oh, well, I'm in this age range now, therefore I'm going to keep an eye out for anything that might match up with these symptoms that people are talking about on Instagram, and, you know, therefore I'm beginning to suffer as early as possible. I mean, for me, like, what drives me nuts is, like, where have my words gone? Like, you know, when you forget a word and you're like, I can't get it. It's just it's just over there, but I can't reach it. And 3 days later, you're like, oh,
that's
you know.
Yeah. And that's the one symptom that if we're going to pick anything up. So if we've got, so we're looking at, just let's say we're looking at women in their 40s and early 50s. So we're looking at that perimenopause time when you might still be getting your periods, but everything's kind of irregular and all over the place. So your hormones are kind of roller coastering. And the one, if we were to go in and do cognitive testing in that time, what we could reliably often pick up is that word finding ability. That definitely seems to be the one problem that shows up. And what we don't necessarily understand is why that is the thing that we start noticing. And often, and it's not all of the time, and certainly if the testing that we were doing, like that typical word finding ability, or what I do is, it's not always forgetting the word. Sometimes I just substitute like a loosely related word, which makes me just sound ridiculous. It's like I'd say to one of my boys one day, oh, that's a nice lid. And I'm just like, I mean, hat. Hat is similar. Apparently lid is like a word that you can use for hat. So I might say dishwasher,
also haircut
machine. So I'll do these semantic kind of substitutions, and we don't, and there's a lot of different reasons as to why that may be the case, and we don't necessarily know why, whether it's directly, is it the roller coastering hormones are somehow directly impacting these kind of verbal networks in our brain, or is it something that's a bit kind of down the track? Is it, you know, roller coastering hormones are disrupting healthy sleep, even if you're not waking up at night, perhaps that's disrupting your sleep architecture, and your cognitive verbal networks are then not functioning as well as they used to because your sleep is disrupted. And maybe your sleep is being disrupted because your body temperature is kind of a bit out of whack. And we know that happens when estrogen starts roller coastering. So there's all these kind of like different pieces in the puzzle, this kind of like web or constellation of different symptoms. And we're not entirely sure yet what is the exact cause and what is the effect. What we do know, though, and lots of women that do have this kind of verbal word finding kind of, I don't want to use the word disability problem, I have it. Once you get out the other side, apparently it improves. And so typically we might pick that up, verbal problems during perimenopause. And then once you get out the other side and you're in your 50s and the hormones stabilize, then often that ability comes back, which is really good news. So
That's
it's not
great.
like
so we'll find all
an
those
inevitable
words.
decline down to not being able to, you know, come up with any words by the time you're sort of 60 or 70.
Yeah. So they're just waiting with all the lost socks until we pop out.
Yes.
Pop out the other side.
You know where they are? I always say the kids' lost socks. They're under the front seats of the car.
Yeah,
Oh,
more than likely.
yeah.
Go and
Yeah.
have a look over there.
Yeah, true, because they whip them off, don't they, and then just sort of
Yeah.
stuff them somewhere.
And amongst the pencils and
Yeah, I
French
once
fries.
found like over 30 of them under the fronts.
Wow.
Yeah. Back in the days when I still don't clean my car.
Who does? Who does? Wow.
So this is like the kind of the perimenopause story, is we've got brain fog, and is that directly due to the hormones, or is it, you know, sort of a domino effect whereby it's sort of sleep, it's a little bit of anxiety thrown in for the mix, because that's kind of what's also inevitable, particularly if you're throwing in hot flashes there, because hot flashes are like sort of a sympathetic nervous system activation. It's a kind of a panic stations in your body and brain to cool you down. A tiny rise in body temperature, your body sort of overreacts. If you're asleep, your body has to kind of wake you up. And so you wake up with a bit of a fright. you end up with this kind of dialed up, like it's kind of wired and tired nervous system. And when your nervous system is wired and tired, we're humans, right? It does not take very long for your brain to just go, well, I need to fill in the gap. Well, I feel worried. What am I going to worry about? And it'll take you about 3.5 seconds to find something to worry about.
Mm-hmm.
I know I've got plenty.
The brain it's good at that. It's
It will just
quite
find
good at
something.
thinking, oh, you want to worry? Oh, brilliant. I've got a
You
few
want to
things
find something to
backlogged.
worry about? You're a mum. Doesn't matter how old your kids are. My oldest son, next Friday he's about to go into HSC here in Australia. Next Friday is his last actual day of schooling.
Wow.
Which is so exciting. But of course, I'll just worry about the next phase of his life. There's always something.
Oh, there's
And then once
always
you
a
start
worry.
worrying, you can't get back to sleep. La, la, la. We've got this whole sort of perfect storm almost of things that are happening in our brain during this phase of life.
And then what's the silver lining of this whole transition?
Oh, there are so many. There's the whole, like, you just have way less fucks to give, which I think just comes with age. So
Mhm.
the older you are, the greater that feeling grows. And I'm very much enjoying this, this just sort of phase of life. I think you start to care more about what actually matters, and that both as a feeling. But interestingly, if we're looking at the brain and we're looking at different types of, as I always talk about, we can do all these different types of cognitive tests. Some of these might be around things like pattern recognition. So particularly if you're in a certain profession, like I'm in neuroscience, like say I had to go and have brain surgery. I don't want like some 24-year-old dude who's just graduated from medical school who thinks he's the shit. Who's learning neurosurgery to operate on my brain. I actually want someone who's perhaps like 52 or 53 or 54. Apparently that's peak for surgery.
Mhm.
You have like all of this experience, but your motor skills you haven't got, the motor
Haven't
skills
started to
decline
just slowly
yet.
decline. Yeah.
Yeah. So someone like that has a lifetime of kind of learned, you've more
seen a lot.
stuff, right? And you've also got better pattern recognition. You're able to kind of go in and make reasonably rapid decisions based on the information in front of you. I don't like to necessarily use the word intuitively, but you're going to be able to do that much, much faster because of the pattern recognition, because of like just this life of experience that's built up that's enabled you to make much quicker decisions based on experience rather than necessarily based on learned theories. So that kind of, decades of learning plays out in many different aspects of your life. It plays out socially in terms of just being able to like kind of gauge people, know who's, worth your time, who's not, what matters, what doesn't. If someone's not worth your time, it doesn't really matter. I don't really need to care too much about that anymore. You're not in that same kind of hyper socially aware state where what other people think about you matters so much. And maybe there's a bit of an evolutionary mandate for that, because when you're young, you're heading off to uni, you're in your early 20s, you're building and you're growing and you're finding your tribe, and perhaps, you're finding a partner. You're in this kind of building, growing, youthful, expansive time of life, and you need to be worrying about what other people think and feel. And you also need much sharper cognitive skills around, perhaps, because you're building and growing, you need to be learning rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
When you're kind of in your 50s, you kind of have built, you have grown, you have mated.
You can
you have
start to
dated,
just enjoy.
You have bred. You're more in a kind of a consolidation phase, and you don't need the quick, short, sharp thinking of youth. You need the slower wisdom of aging. And perhaps there's like kind of a generational mandate in that. It's about, sharing the wisdom with the youngers, but also being able to be kind of more stable and steady.
I love that. And there's also confidence, I think, that comes with it as well. Like I think of women that I know who are in their 50s and 60s. There's just a real confident in their skills that they've developed over their lifetime, confident in their relationships and who they are. And there's no worrying about that. There's no worrying about, will I be good enough for this? Will I be good enough for that? It's just this kind of self-contentment that I've noticed.
Yes. And I think the thing is that we place so much weight on like speed and learning and like the rapidity of thinking less on the wisdom and the judgment and the problem solving that comes from experience, particularly in the workplace. So there's so much conversation about intergenerational workplaces, and so much focus is often on the young brains and how quick they are at picking things up. And I suppose as a society, we tend to valorize that, and we grieve that when it's lost. And so when we're constantly talking about baby brain, or we're talking about brain fog, we're talking about what we've lost, not the skills that we've gained. There's this really interesting research that's come out in the last year or so as well. As one of my colleagues here, I believe I have a paper sitting in front of me, Maureen Irish, who is Irish neuroscientist here in Sydney. And she's really interested in this kind of what happens to our cognition in midlife. Because there's not this inevitable slide and decline from 18 down to 80. There's lots of different kinds of patterns and different ages at which different skills peak. And she's developing these new types of cognitive testing but she's particularly interested in this idea of cognitive flexibility or behavioral flexibility. And sort of underlying that are things like beliefs and habits and the ability to kind of change tack. And when you're young, you're just like push, push, push. You're like really driven. If you've made a plan, you want to follow it through. And also when you notice people who are much older, people in their 70s, 80s, 90s, perhaps get very set in their ways. Whereas at midlife is when we're actually at our most flexible. We can kind of, pivot or switch or assess a situation and think, well, that's not necessarily going to work. I'm happy to kind of take on a different idea. I'm happy to change my belief systems. Habits are easier to kind of make and break and form. And so she's found this kind of peak almost in your late 40s, early 50s for this concept of cognitive flexibility. And that's an amazing skill to have that younger people aren't as great at and older people aren't as great at, yet the conversation around women in midlife seems to be solely about, well, I can't remember my words. And well, okay, well, it doesn't matter. So lots of people forget their words. Like my teenage sons, honestly, the older one's getting a bit better, but the shoes, the school blazer, like I gave up making them lunch years ago because they would never take it. Now it's ordering lunch on time. And they don't have dementia. They don't have menopause. They don't have baby brain.
They're just teenage boys.
It's about attention. They're just walking in the door and throwing all of their clothes everywhere, and the dog then runs around with them.
So even as teenagers, that still happens as a teenager, because my kids are 6'4" and 1.5, and every day I'm like, just remember when you come in, if you could just hang that up, and then in the morning getting their uniform on, I'm like, just remember jammies under the pillow, and sometimes
good luck.
Sometimes yes, but
I've just given up.
Oh, it's so funny.
So long as they have clothes on when they walk out the door,
that's a win.
But
yeah,
I think
exactly.
The thing is, we at different ages, when we forget things or when we misplace things or there's chaos, we attribute it to different kind of when they're kids, we're still trying to teach them how to do this, and when we're teenagers, we're going, oh, it's probably their phones. And like phones are a massive, massive distraction for everyone at every age. When we're pregnant and we are mothers and we're living in the chaos, then it's baby brain. And then when we're heading into kind of perimenopause and there's more chaos, again, it's brain fog. And then once you kind of hit your 50s and 60s, then you become convinced it's Alzheimer's or dementia. And I think the thing is, our brains are a complex ecosystem in their own right, in our body, in this massively complex, chaotic world that we live in, this ecosystem that we live in. And our brains are typically not what the problem is. Our brains are typically adapting and responding and trying to do the best in the situation they're in and the age and life stage they're in. It's not always inherently a problem of a brain being broken. It's a brain trying to do its best and adapt and respond and be as efficient as it could be. I don't want to sound like, that this is the only problem. The phones are the only problem. My phone is telling me work, focus, suggestion. Since I've just picked it up. There's this wild research that's come out. Again, I like a little bit of, let's go in and test if we can pick up problems with people's cognition. These studies that have done, get someone to do like a working memory test, which is like how many it's like doing mental maths or here's a list of 10 objects, 10 minutes later, can you remember them? And they've got people to do it with just like the testing, just like with their phones kind of there, or with their phones like turned off and face down next to them. You know how like when you go to a restaurant, you think, just put my phone down and I won't notice it's there. And then the phone's in another room. When the phones are in another room, people score as well as they should. As soon as the phone is next to them, even if it's turned off and face down, their cognitive test scores plummet.
Wow.
Wow.
And they're not that
Yeah.
dissimilar as to whether the phone is on or off. Because if your phone is next to you, you're just like,
Yeah.
oh, no.
You're aware of it.
You're aware of it. And
Yeah.
that's that constant like refocusing of attention. It's so incredibly salient, and it's almost like this little baby that we're carrying around with us now. Like we can't kind of cope without it. And when we haven't got it, we're wondering where it is. And even if it's next to us, turned off, and we're doing a little cognitive testing, our working memory exam, our brain is just the kind of trying to distract ourselves away from the phone back to what we're focusing on, can completely obliterate your working memory scores, your attention scores,
Wow.
your ability to be able to resist temptation. There's different kinds of tests they can do where, should you move towards or away, which is kind of all around kind of distraction and temptation.
That's fascinating.
Yeah,
I
and we
somewhere-
think it's our brain. Imagine if you're like carrying a baby and a phone. A baby
so
is like
often was the case.
consuming all of our attention because as I taught you girls, your maternal mind has been rewired and reorganized to focus your attention on the baby.
Mm.
And then you've also got a phone, which is like as like salient and relevant and, kind of captivating as a baby. You got the two of them. Of course, you can't remember where the socks are.
Oh, definitely. I remember sometimes I'd be breastfeeding one of my little ones, and then I'd have my phone with me and I'd be like scrolling through photos of them. And then I had a couple of moments of being like, what the heck am I doing? Like
It's so
she's
beautiful.
right there. She's right there. I can get a real-time image right now. And it happened a couple of
so
times.
funny.
And it was just like a bit of a shock to the system where I was
Yeah.
looking down at myself from above, being like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But I actually read, Sarah, a while ago, I don't know how true this is, so it'll have to be fact checked, but that it takes on average 20 minutes to get back to the level of focus that you had before an interruption of a phone, even just a quick check of
Yeah.
something, and then it's
Yeah.
an average of 20 minutes every
Yeah.
time.
I'm not sure about that timing, but I think it's very, very real. And I've been thinking about it quite a lot lately because my hours on my phone are high, but I listen to a ton of podcasts all day long.
Mhm.
But I have noticed recently, I'll have especially because my teenage sons pick it up and then they tell me. Other people are probably much more nice or polite. I'll have a conversation. They're like, we already talked about that. And I'm going, oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot that we had that conversation. And I don't believe it's a problem with me remembering. I think it's a problem with me not consolidating the ideas because so often I've just got my headphones in and I'm just like listening to podcasts all day long. And then they'll walk in the room. I'll, mute my, turn the sound off, have the conversation with them, and then go straight back to paying attention to the podcast. I can remember what the podcast people said, but I can't remember the conversation very clearly because I never even gave a moment for it to sort of sink in and then consolidate and then perhaps turn that idea over in my mind. So I'm trying now to see whether I can not just have the phone off, but also not be constantly listening because I feel like I'm losing the context of the conversations that I'm having. And I'm sure it's not a brain problem because I'm not losing the conversations that I'm listening to via a podcast, but the real life conversations I'm not paying the same degree of attention to.
It's so interesting. It's like our brains are sort of spliced all the time in these different directions. And so then you can't kind of like see one process through or conversation through and then
100%.
and like it's like you don't digest that whole thing.
Yes. Yeah. And
doesn't have time to file it.
Yeah. So once you have, you have an experience, then, and I know, because I kind of think I have just such clear memories of like when I was young, when I was, all the way through school, I've got so many clear memories. But I also used to spend a lot of time thinking about, I've always been a bit of a sort of a thinker. And I remember I'd go to bed at night and I'd be lying there next to my sister in Christchurch where I grew up. And, and I'd be lying there going, what are you thinking about? What are you thinking about? And she'd be like, nothing. And I'd be like, how can you think of nothing? She says, I don't know. I'm just like lying here. And I would be like going through every moment of the day and every conversation I had. And I feel like the turning, it's almost kind of, just bringing those memories back and turning them over again and then storing them again. That's how we remember things. And my personal belief right now is, at least for me, I'm not doing that in the same way. I'm replaying the podcast conversation or this like cool thing I learned from NPR or whatever, and I'm not paying the same attention to the real life interactions I'm having.
Because it feels a little bit just kind of flippant, right? It's just kind of, oh, yep, great, blah, 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 done.
Yeah.
And now back to learning.
Yeah. And I don't believe it's a problem with my brain. I believe it's a problem with the ecosystem my brain is within. And so I'm trying to change that up as best I can. And I was talking yesterday as well. I was thinking about like AI, this is this great thing, and I can use it to like, I have to write a really difficult email to someone. And I'm like, oh, I'll put it in AI and I'll let that do the work. Well, it's not like I'm then using that saved time to do anything. I'm then like scrolling through Instagram. Like I'm not replacing that saved time with anything more worthwhile. Certainly for me, I'm trying to not just think about my brain from, should I be on hormones? Should I, take creatine supplements? Because I honestly reckon creatine got invented like a month ago. Like there's some like marketing campaign.
There's something going on, right? Because I'm sold. I'm like, creatine is this incredible thing for cognitive ability. And
seriously, a month ago, right? It's like everywhere. I'm like, some companies doing some good marketing because it's like gone into all of our brains and all anyone's asking me about. So I'm trying to like think we've got all of these additions that we can add in and the exercise and the diet and the sleep, and I've got lots of, and the social and the stress, but the attention and the focus and the how I'm using my brain instead of constantly distracting my brain, and multitasking, I think is the big thing. We know that you can't pay attention to two things at once. You just task switch and you never then go very deep on each item. You never remember that item when you're, flipping between things. And I'm convinced that phones are this constant multitasking.
Sarah, I'm interested in talking about the sort of adaptive capabilities of the midlife brain, because, when you're talking about you're sort of consolidated more and then you're more flexible and more adaptive and you've pulled this wisdom and stuff like that. Because I'm thinking about like, okay, so brain up until that point, especially if you're like looking after, you've had babies and children and the whole family's schedule and everything, like you're constantly split and juggling mentally all of these things. And is it like partly hormonal cognitive changes that mean that you can consolidate and have those advantages and adaptations, or is it also that like life might be a bit simpler and you're not having to organize like 4 people and 3 animals and a household as well at that time in your life? And then you're like, oh, well, I've actually got more of my brain capability available to direct and use instead of being like, resource to all of these people and all of these things.
Yeah. I see where you're coming from. So if we see greater flexibility at midlife in terms of being able to switch and pivot and, create and break habits, etc., is that due to biological aging and hormones in there, or is it due to just the like
a change in basically your context
or different? And it's because the study didn't look, it looked at men and women. So the male midlife brain is, like humans at that age are typically slightly more flexible than younger or older humans. So it's not necessarily going to be a biological sex thing there. It's not necessarily the hormones there that are doing this. And is it to do with? Yeah, that's interesting. I talked to Maureen Irish about this, and she said she wasn't entirely sure. She thinks there's probably like a biological aging process in there that's kind of part of that. And what we know is brains get older. So if you think about brains, have got like different parts of the brain have got different jobs to do, but particularly when it comes to like thinking type skills. We talk more about networks. We've got different networks in the brain kind of are responsible for different tasks. And as we kind of go from our 30s, say, through to our 40s, 50s, 60s, we see that the networks and brains start behaving slightly differently. When you go through puberty, they get very, very specialized. Each network sort of starts to work on has a particular job. But as you get older, brains are aging, like you literally are. Like, I mean, you're getting more wrinkly, your hair's going grey. We can't like not get older. Our brains are aging too over that time, but the brain adapts and then it goes, we might just need a little bit, we might need some more neurons here to get the job done. And so the brain networks become a bit more integrated. So instead of being very segregated, they kind of cooperate more and more kind of brain regions come online to get the job done. So the brain is constantly reacting and responding that way. And it may be something to do with that in midlife, that as networks become more flexible, because they kind of have to be, then that flexibility is what enables the brain to be able to shift and change and respond more rapidly. We don't know why. That's just kind of one theory we've got. I don't think that once you get to your 50s, it probably depends what age you had your kids, right?
True.
They go away to university and then you decide to just get lots of puppies instead. Like that's my plan. I'm not entirely sure we know that yet.
Yeah.
But I think that like the overarching idea is it's not like this sort of downward decline. Like there's lots of kind of things which, change and grow and shift. Verbal, once we get like through perimenopause, like your vocabulary keeps continuing. It gets, better as you get older because you've like literally learned more words.
And you've heard so many.
You might take a little bit longer to remember some of them, but overall your vocab is actually bigger.
Yeah. Yeah, like you might
maybe
lose
that's
them
part
for
of
a day.
it.
Yeah.
Maybe that's part of it as well. It's like, there's more to sort through, so it takes longer.
Yeah, and it just takes a little bit longer for the kind of the idea to sort of bubble up. So we've got, more sort of, we develop better sort of strategic thinking and big picture skills. I did this TV show here, Our Catalyst, which is kind of like a science show with the ABC here a few years ago. And we were looking at healthy brain aging. And I went down to Melbourne and they've got this big hedge maze kind of out in the burbs. And they got in these people who were showing like incredible resilience to aging. They were all in their 80s and 90s, but were all still sharp as a tack. And we tested their cognition. They were showing brains that were decades younger than their chronological age. And then they got the kids of those people who were in like their 30s, 40s and 50s who looked remarkably young for their ages, I must say. And so we had a group of youngers and a group of elders and we got them to like kind of race each other through the maze. Well, the elders went first and the youngers went at a different time. And there was various tasks to do along the way and they were showing them out the maze first. And the youngers completed the maze much quicker. It was super interesting because we filmed it from above. The elders were slower, but they made no mistakes getting there. They came up with this strategy and then they executed the strategy. And you can see these shots from the air and you can see them all just kind of like walking along. And they would go, we've got to go right here. And they all turned right. Whereas the youngers looked at the maze and went, oh, figure it out. And they went in, they were like, you come in. No, that's not the right way. And they sort of
dead end.
their way through the maze. But they made lots of mistakes along the way. They didn't come up with a really thoughtful strategy that they deployed perfectly. It was so interesting to see the different approaches. And maybe the younger ones knew, well, we've got the physical capability to be able to send someone off on a recce and see if that's right or wrong and then come back and then quickly reset. Whereas the elders were like, we're not going to do that. We're going to be thoughtful, calm and strategic.
We're going to do it once, do it right.
Do it right. Yeah. And we're going to come up with our plan and we're not going to deviate from it. And it was slower but more accurate. It was super interesting.
Working smarter, not harder.
Yeah, which is the better strategy. They're just two different strategies. If we were only if time was the metric that mattered, the youngers would have won. But if making mistakes was the metric that matters, the elders would have won. They both got there in the end. And that's just showing how at different ages and life stages we use different strategies to solve problems. And we didn't know that was what was going to happen in this show. It was really, really cool.
That's fun.
It's a brilliant experiment. I love that. And so, what are some of the conditions that our brains need most right now to harness those cognitive advantages that are
You know,
available to us as
the
we
most
age?
important thing, which for some people is the hardest thing, is sleep. Like
Yep.
if you have not got that, it is so hard to build anything else on top of that. And particularly midlife women, if you've got your hot flashes, your hormones are skew with, and you're literally starting to get vasomotor symptoms, even if they're not necessarily waking you up at night, they will be just disrupting your sleep architecture. You go to sleep and you're meant to go into deep sleep. If you track your sleep on a Fitbit or whatever you've got, you can see your sort of sleep cycle. And there's a pretty ideal type of sleep architecture that you want, the different stages of sleep you go through at night. As soon as you add disrupted body temperature into that, that disrupts that architecture. Even if you don't wake up, you will wake up the next day not feeling like you were well. You might have had 8 hours, but it wasn't good, solid sleep through all of those different stages. And that doesn't matter if the heat source is from within you. If it's a really hot night, like it doesn't matter how old you are, if
Same
it's a
thing.
really hot night and you can't cool your room, you'll sleep, it's harder to get to sleep and you have like crazy dreams and you wake up the next day, you don't feel refreshed. That's because your sleep architecture didn't do its nice like thing that it's meant to do. And so as soon as hormones come into the mix and start roller coastering, that will disrupt the sleep architecture. And that's kind of the foundation of all of that for women in midlife. So whatever you can do to ensure that you're getting good, solid sleep, and then everything else can build from that. And if that means taking hormone replacement therapy or menopause hormone therapy, if that's a conversation you have with your doctor and you decide to go for it, we do have evidence that it can help reset that thermostat in your brain. But perimenopause is difficult because some months you have sky high levels of estrogen and other months you have hardly any. So it's a roller coaster. And then all you can do with menopause hormone therapy is add more hormones in. It's like quite a blunt tool. It's great for the other end. It's great for like late perimenopause and postmenopause because you're not adding more on top of a extra high level. You're just kind of adding to the delta when you're doing it in early perimenopause. So that's kind of a difficult time, and that's often when women are finding things a bit harder to manage. But later on, we've got really good evidence that can help with sleep, and then maybe those dominoes will come back up. It doesn't necessarily fix brain fog because brain fog is complicated. Weirdly, putting it back in doesn't necessarily make you remember the words. Wish it did, right? It would make sense that it should, but the studies show that it doesn't necessarily do that. So we've got to I think we're still like kind of in the early stages of figuring that out. But I mean, long story short there, whatever you can do to improve your sleep.
And is that the same? Yeah, God, it's amazing how it's like it comes back to sleep. So
it always does.
I'm
sure everyone tells you that. It's so boring.
Yeah.
Well, it's sort of, it underpins everything, doesn't it? All aspects of health, sleep can affect.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. Emotional regulation. As soon as your emotional regulation's out of whack and you're feeling
blood sugar.
Yep. Depression, just everything.
I mean, it's boring, but it's at least it's simple, like
it's simple, but it's not necessarily easy. And it's all very well to talk just about sleep hygiene and all of the things, which I'm not going to get into because everyone's probably heard it 100 times, but you still should do it. Plus, if people are genuinely having trouble, there's a type of cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which deals with sleep hygiene, but also gives people lots of kind of tools and techniques. Maybe your problem is falling asleep at night. Maybe your problem is waking up at 3 a.m. and not being able to get back to sleep. There's different kinds of ways and strategies that you can approach that. And there is tools and strategies and help out there and medications as well.
And what about, when we're talking about longevity and wanting the best brain health for as long as possible, is this, we want to still crush Wordle in our 90s, right?
Yeah,
like
we do. And
right.
And the best way to crush Wordle in your 90s is to keep doing Wordle in your 90s.
Yeah.
Doing all of the things.
Is the answer then for longevity also number one thing you can do is get good sleep? Or what else should we be thinking about if we want brains that are crushing Wordle in our 90s?
Yeah. So we can look at what the data says. We might as well I should probably stick with the science because that's my jam. So we've got pretty clear information coming in now about dementia risk and, what we need to be doing from early life, midlife, and later life to prevent that. And education and staying gainfully employed and kind of cognitively engaged and stimulated throughout life is important, particularly those early years. You can't really do much once you're not at school anymore, but, the more kind of cognitively stimulating work you do, and if you're a podcast host, you're already there doing that.
Fantastic.
Midlife, we haven't really got, in terms of dementia risk reduction, information in about hormone therapy yet because the data's mixed. Some studies are saying, it might increase risk. Some saying, it might, reduce risk. It's like the set of scales. We don't yet know the size of the weight and which side to put it on yet. So we'll just have to set that aside. Anything to do with heart health, cardiovascular health. Remember jump rope for heart? Remember
Yes.
we used to do that? So we all learned about heart health when we were young. And there's so many relationships between cardiovascular health and brain health because our brains just have this incredibly complex, rich network of blood vessels and really fine capillaries. And it's not just heart health, but it's cardiovascular health. You want your blood vessels to stay healthy as well. So all of the things you do to protect cardiovascular health, which is like exercise, which is like not smoking, not drinking too much, making sure you haven't got massively high cholesterol, high blood pressure, diabetes, all of that kind of metabolic health sort of, big lump of things to do is really good for protecting health. Interestingly, there's some very unsexy research which has emerged around hearing loss in midlife because people do start to kind of go, what did you say? They start to struggle at midlife, and there's a real stigma, there used to be around hearing aids because, they used to be these big plastic things you had behind your ears. Now they're much more discreet and, you can, dial in or dial out what you're listening to using your phone and your hearing aids. And that's such an under-recognized yet massive risk factor for poor brain health. Because if you can't hear, you can't socially engage. And so then you disengage and you're just reducing all of the interactions that you have with people in the world around you. And as soon as you start folding in on yourself, your brain, isn't getting the stimulation it needs. So that's a pretty important one as well.
God, that is fascinating.
It's super unsexy and there's no hearing aid Instagram influencers as yet that I've come across.
But I get it.
All audiologists out there that could take this up.
Yeah. It's interesting. I get it because when I was in Bali one time, I was on this retreat and I got a terrible double ear infection from diving. Yeah. And I honestly had no hearing in one ear, probably 5 or 10% in the other ear. I was deaf. And it wasn't a great situation. But I realized how isolating it was not to have hearing because I couldn't really engage with people well at all. And then everyone knew that I couldn't hear anything. So they'd go and talk to them. They were like, oh, she can't hear. And then
we'll
not
just
really
forget about her.
Yeah, we'll just leave her over there in that quiet little corner. And I was like, oh my God, I see how it happens. And because it's kind of awkward and tricky and difficult and everyone's got to make more of an effort.
It's a social thing as well. So it becomes awkward and weird.
Yeah, you withdraw. Or people just, don't intentionally do it, but they don't include you as much. And then you're like, oh wow, this is so isolating. So it's quite
not like,
an insight.
She's got high blood pressure. We better not talk to her. Because it's a social interaction.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and I think there's so much stigma around it. And then there's so much noise about so many different aspects of brain health, but not noise about this, which is a bit of a shame. But I'm sure someone will take it up. And
definitely.
then, and then embedded in that is that social aspect. So whatever we can do to kind of ensure that we can keep on interacting and engaging in the world, and we're socializing and we're exercising in ways that are fun and sustainable, and we're eating well and looking after our cardiovascular metabolic health. Nothing new under the sun there really, although I think the hearing loss is particularly, and it's untreated hearing loss, so it's
that's interesting. Someone in my family said something recently that I really loved, and he said he has a theory that you really start to decline in older age when you close yourself off to new ideas.
Yeah.
And I loved that so much because he said the more that you remain open to new information, new ideas,
Mm.
and learning from the younger generation as well, rather than being only like, I
Yes,
know best because I'm older.
yes,
Just being
yes.
open to
Yeah.
new
And
information
that's
and
and that's
changing the
that
pathway.
flexibility.
Exactly,
Yeah, that's that
exactly.
flexibility. What I noticed about when I was at this hedgerow maze in Melbourne with these, like, amazing super ages, they were called, one of the things I noticed about them was their attitudes to life. I've got this photo of them talking to the kind of the camera crew with they had a couple of drones and some of the camera equipment, and they're all there just like, oh, like looking at the drone, and they were like kids. They were like,
Yeah.
tell us about the drone. How did you learn to fly a drone? How did you become a cameraman? What does this button do? If it goes up, can you do it? And they were
I
just all
love
gathered
that.
around like these
Just
enthusiastic
curious.
kids. And it was like almost this innate wanting to absorb absolutely everything. And then when we sat down at lunch together, they were like, and tell us about yourself, and how did you get this job, and where did you come from, and what does your mum do for? And they were just naturally super engaged and enthused about life. And I
Mm.
was like, that's like, these people were amazing. They were like tick, 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 all of the things that you should do. But what is interesting is they probably weren't doing that to not age. It was just kind of
It was
part of,
innate.
who they were as people. If we could just kind of capture some of that and that life enthusiasm. But we typically see older people, they become almost orphans of time, right? Because their friends die, their partners die, particularly people who are really old. You think of someone who was like this super young, engaged person who had a really rich social life and kids and partner, and then they're like in a nursing home all by themselves and they don't have any visitors. And that's not uncommon at all. I worked in nursing homes for years when I was in uni, and you would have, most people never had anyone come and visit them ever, except like this girl who was a uni student who had to toilet them.
And
And
then they
it's
just
just like,
just
just think
pass
about how
away by
sad that
themselves.
is.
It's
How
so
can they?
sad.
Yeah, it's so sad. So,
Mm.
we want to do we want to do the opposite of that for as long as possible.
Yes, definitely. And Sarah, do you feel like the tide is starting to turn a little bit in terms of the way women's brains and women are talked about in midlife? Do you think it's starting to turn, or
I'm
do we
really
have hope?
No, I'm not sure. I feel like I'm out here all by myself in the sea of brain fog conversations and menopause in the workplace conversations, which I think are good, but I have a massive concern that the focus right now, because we're trying to play catch up, the focus is on what goes wrong, and this is a health problem that we need to fix, is feeding into gendered ageism. I have a really good friend of mine, they're employing someone new in her workplace recently, and she was in charge of that whole process, quite a small workplace that didn't have HR. And she said, I had some women in their 50s who applied for the job. And she was like, do you think I should bother interviewing them, because doesn't everyone have brain fog? And this girl works in kind of health medical fields.
And
And
being
I was
like,
just like,
oh,
oh my
oh, we've
God.
got
And
some, we've
she
got
said,
some
I'm
work to
trying really
do.
hard not to think about that, but like, maybe there's just no point. And I was like, I don't know whether a menopause in the workplace campaign would solve that problem or make that worse, because it feels very much like the conversation is only about, we've got these hot, forgetful, slightly depressed, sweaty ladies. Make sure you give them a fan and some cold water
And
and
a cup of
let them
tea, and
lie
they'll be
down.
all right. Yeah.
And I understand the intentions, but I'm very, very concerned that it's not necessarily, unless we are not only talking about dysfunction. And I worry that this is just kind of more of a modern day, like kind of, the hysteria, like go, pat you on the head, go away. It's all, it's just all in your head. It's just hysteria, is that we're talking about only the anxiety and the depression and the brain fog and the sweatiness and the tiredness and women leaving the workplace. We're not talking about, these cool people who were super strategic, getting through a maze and didn't make mistakes, and were curious and interested and cognitive flexibility, and how your vocab increases and you've got this wisdom to impart and share. And we're not talking about the benefits in ourselves. If we can't talk about them in ourselves, how can we convince anyone else? I guess if they went through this with trying to get maternity leave, options for women. And I feel like we've kind of moved on a bit from that. We had to talk about the upsides of having mums in the workplace. I'm a little bit concerned right now that I think the conversation will mature. But
It's
right
in
now,
that kind of hysteria phase.
Right now I'm not convinced it's necessarily where it needs to be, but I think it will get there once everyone's stop sort of frothing at the social media algorithm will guide us through to a new
exactly. Figure out the next thing to.
We need some good influencers.
Yeah.
Good,
I did
curious,
this.
enthusiastic.
Yeah, I'm sure you
influencers.
saw. I did this Instagram post. I put it on LinkedIn. I was like, I'm so sick of everyone talking about all the things go wrong. Why don't we talk about cognitive flexibility and pattern recognition and emotional regulation? And all this. And I put this Instagram. It's like the only time in my life I've almost nearly gone viral. Not quite, except when I did Mel Robbins' podcast, but that was her, not me, that had the big reach. But like that was shared like thousands and thousands of times, and it's had like hundreds of thousands of views. That's never happened to me before. And almost everyone, 99.9% of people were going, oh my goodness, it's so good to hear some good news. I feel like people have just like become deflated that
it's depressing.
Terrible time is inevitable.
Because it's also like, well, where is the peak then?
Here's some good news. And everyone was like, oh my goodness, why is no one talking about this? So there's a need for it, but I understand right now why we're in the place we're in. And that's because we're still trying to get the research to catch up and plug the gaps, which are massively needed, particularly for those women who really genuinely do need the extra help and support and care. But some people some of the time isn't everyone all of the time.
Yeah. And the thing is with Instagram and stuff, it's easy to laugh at sweaty women who can't remember anything. Right?
Goodness. Yeah.
I saw that post of yours and I was like, it's like so, it's horrible. And when I saw your post, I'm like, this is so refreshing. Like, let's talk about the strengths of what we're going into and what there is to look forward to. It's refreshing. And the idea of just like giving fewer fucks about everything. That's how liberating. And we've got all that to look forward to. We did actually, this is off topic, Sarah, but as we've got you, we did actually run a poll on our Instagram because I saw something that was like that 30% of people, now I can't remember the percentage, don't have an internal dialogue.
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard about this? Can you have any insight for people like...
This is what I was saying about my sister.
Right, because you said that.
I'd lying there at night just like, woo. And I go, what do you think about? What do you think? And she'd be like, nothing. And I'd be like, what
do you mean?
How can you not think? But yeah, some people don't.
What's happening in there?
And related to that, like mine is just non-stop. And I think that's sometimes why I listen to so many podcasts to just I'm so sick of the sound of myself.
Yeah.
If I have to like keep on hearing me, so I put someone else's voice in my ears. But there's also, so some people don't have an internal dialogue. And then some people also don't have a very strong visual sense of things either. There's this idea of hyperphantasia, like you've got very clear visual sort of images in your mind, which I have. Like I could think I need to go to the supermarket and I could make my shopping list by going, well, I walk in and the first thing I see is the bananas and then the oranges, and I'll turn right and there's the grapes, and I could work my way around the supermarket and write a list in order. Yeah. Whereas some people, and I know my mum says this, she says she doesn't have that visual sense at all. She's what we might say she has aphantasia. And I'm like, well, how do you know? Like my mum's super organized. I'm like, how do you, when you think about going to the supermarket, what's in your mind? And she's like, oh, well, I just have the word, I just know the things I need to buy. And I'm like, but don't you see them? And she's like, no, I don't think my sister does either. So we've got these different, and I think if we don't all have access to other people's minds, and it's only perhaps with social media, people start talking about these things and people realize different people have a different degree of an internal world. And it's interesting because there is a little bit of research looking at if you have a very strong internal dialogue and a very strong visual sort of sense, which I definitely do, you also have quite vivid dreams.
Yeah.
And go to I have these dreamlands, different kind of places I go and visit in my dreams, and I know my way around them. And I'll have like big kind of epic adventures and do things in
It's quite fun.
It's quite cool, yeah. And then other people don't remember their dreams, and they typically also don't have a very strong internal dialogue or a strong visual sense. So we've got these like, our minds are like so wild. And there's also a bit of evidence around that you'll have a better autobiographical memory, so very clear memories of your childhood and teenage years, because you've kind of replayed it in your mind so many times. So you have quite a clear sense of that. And I certainly have that too.
It's fascinating.
I don't know what
really
the people who don't have that, what they do.
I've got
What do
songs.
they do with all their time and energy? I don't know.
They must have a lot of time.
Yeah.
Maybe they can just get a lot of stuff done.
Yeah. Apparently, we heard from one listener that it's extremely peaceful, and I think good for her.
Yeah.
Oh,
It
must be nice.
Must be nice. Yeah, you just kind of sit there, and maybe it's a bit more like, you know those memes where you've got like the dog and the person walking the dog, and then the dog's just like looking at what's around them. A bit like when you're breastfeeding, you're like, you could look at your daughter instead of looking at the photos of the daughter. Maybe those people actually are genuinely much more engaged with the world around them and their default mode network, which is kind of what those networks in the brain that are responsible for that isn't that strong. I mean, some people, it's not a great thing for them because their internal dialogues and their internal imaginings may be very, damaging or disruptive or ruminative or negative or whatever, and it's not necessarily a good place for them to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's fascinating. The mind of another is truly knowable, isn't it?
Yeah, those people must listen to podcasts, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they must. I've got music. There's always songs going on. It's actually really
You've got
annoying.
mute songs in your head.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. Constantly,
Yeah.
constantly. Anyway, well, Sarah, thank you so much for coming back to talk to us today. It's been really fun and just really empowering. I feel ready to spread the good word of brains in middle-aged women.
Yeah, like it's fun. Like I love this stage of life. It is like cool.
Yeah.
And people are fun and funny and interesting and yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
And just keep fighting the good fight. Now, there's a bit of an uphill battle to to climb, but hey, we're right there with you.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Really appreciate your time.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Untidy. If you enjoyed it, we'd love your support to keep making the show. The best thing you can do to help is subscribe by hitting follow in your podcast app and leaving us a little 5-star review. You can also now watch and subscribe on YouTube and check out how these millennials are keeping up with the cool kids on TikTok and the gram. Lastly, please share this podcast with your mates. It means that we can keep building this supportive community, keep giving you untidy episodes, and just keep doing what we love to do.
Don't forget to check out mybigmoments.com for kids' books that make your tricky job of parenting a whole lot easier. Untidy listeners get a discount at checkout, so just pop in Untidy for 10% off your order. Lastly, we would like to thank all of the good people who make this podcast possible. Flicker Williams and Joe Rocker at My Big Moments for the beautiful artwork and design, Maxine London Creative for editing this episode, and Lana Byrne for creating our social content. And to you, our listeners, Araha nui, take care. We'll see you soon.